Buyurun hocam.
Okay. Thank you very much, Barış Hocam. Okay, welcome to the afternoon session. Today we had 3 presenters, but one of them is not presenting. So, Seçil Hocam, we are going to start with you. And then Preeti, by the way, welcome. Preeti, can you hear me? Okay, I think there's some technical problem. Okay, Seçil Hocam, I'm going to start with you because our first presenter, Mustafa Zeki Çıraklı, will be presenting tomorrow sessions. So we're going to start with you. Okay, let me introduce Seçil Erkoç with her brief biography. Okay, Seçil Erkoç received her BA in 2010 from the Department of Western Languages and Literatures at Boğaziçi University. She had her MA degree in 2013 in English Language and Literature Department at Istanbul University with her dissertation entitled The Construction of the Self in Aldous Huxley's Island and the John Fowles' The Magus. During her graduate studies, she worked as a research assistant at Istanbul University and then at Hacettepe University, where she got her PhD from English Language and Literature Department in 2020 with her dissertation entitled Out of the Maze of Dualism, Post-Human Space in Mario Petrici and Alice Oswald's Poetry. Erkoç currently works as a research assistant doctor in the Department of Western Languages and Literature at İnönü University, Turkey. Her research interests include environmental humanities, contemporary nature poetry, ecological posthumanism, comparative literature, contemporary literary theories, and criticism. Okay, today she's going to present a paper titled Patriarchal Violence in Dante Gabriel Rossetti's The Blessed Damozel and Jenny over Idealization and Devaluation of Women. Seçil Hocam, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Hocam, for your kind introduction. And before starting, I also would like to thank the organization committee from Osmaniye Korkut Ata University for making this conference possible and for enabling us to share and spread knowledge. The representation of the Victorian women that is, the representation of the Victorian women on the visual and textual texts of the Victorian England has been studied comprehensively by various scholars so far, but the topic continues attracting academic attention because the hierarchical set of divisions between the sexes and the traditional gender roles ascribed to them stand at the core of the problems that continue resurfacing even today. Therefore, it is necessary to revisit the literary works that problematize the reductionist approaches that tend to sharpen the authority of the polycentric position. And French feminist critic Julia Kristeva, who is well aware of the encoded male dominance within language as a symbolic system, believes that, quote, any theory that essentializes women misrepresents their infinite diversity and leaves them vulnerable to the patriarchal essentialization of women as naturally submissive, overly emotional, and so forth. Indeed, for Kristeva, feminine cannot be defined because there are as many definitions of the feminine as there are women, unquote. In this perspective, any attempt to impose certain labels on women, be they positive or negative, functions as an ideological controlling mechanism that imprisons women into a form of figurative cell that denies them the right to be themselves, which is a form of psychological violence that leaves deep marks on their psyche. The painter-poet Dante Gabriel Rossetti is one of the most significant figures of the Victorian England. As a prominent member of the Pre-Raphaelite Brotherhood, he intends to go beyond the rigid artistic standards of the Royal Academy, and he embraces an original outlook in his paintings. His poetic career also takes in shape in accordance with the anti-traditional stance that he has mostly exemplified in his artistic works. But a closer look into his poetry reveals that Rossetti is not able to redeem himself from the hypocritical gaze directed at women in Victorian England. Also termed as an age of contradictions, Victorian period is notorious for setting the double standards concerning the position of women in the society. Despite putting women on the highest pedestal possible and praising their purity and innocence, the Victorian patriarchy never refrains from creating the possible conditions for the rise of prostitution. Within this perspective, this paper aims to scrutinize the ambiguous and problematic relationship between men and women in Rossetti's selected poems, and to show the extent of the patriarchal violence which operates through an ideological system of objectification. The Blessed Damozel is about the seclusion of a young woman in heaven who is not happy with all the prescribed titles attributed to her, since she prefers to be united with her lover on earth. Jenny, on the other hand, is about a prostitute who spends the night sleeping on the knee of a male speaker, and the poem describes his attraction as well as his feeling of repulsion due to Jenny's presence. When these two poems are analyzed together, it is seen that Victorian patriarchy over-idealizes and degrades women to underscore its dominance and control over their mind and body. Rossetti's ambiguous stance towards women in his life proves functional because it illustrates how the Victorian male psyche too was entrapped within this patriarchal system of codes. Having been raised by a Catholic mother, Rossetti tended to idealize women as angelic beings, and he positioned himself as a prince savior figure who was supposed to rescue the damsels in distress. It is best exemplified in the early stages of his painting career, especially in The Wedding of St. George and Princess Sabra, where he compares himself to St. George and his wife Elizabeth Siddal to a princess. Similarly, in his earlier paintings, such as The Girlhood of Virgin Mary, for which Rossetti's mother and his sister Christina were the models for St. Anne and Virgin Mary respectively, as well as The Annunciation, where Christina Rossetti again posed for Mary, it is possible to see the reflections of the idealized woman image in his works. However, following the death of their still inborn daughter, his wife Elizabeth's health deteriorates and she transforms from the image of an angelic princess to an invalid woman. Not able to confront with the harsh reality, Rossetti gets distance from his wife only to find her dead due to an overdose of laudanum in 1862, for which he was never able to forgive himself. The Blessed Damozel, which was written long before the death of Elizabeth Siddal, is about the longing of a young unmarried lady for her lover on earth, bearing in mind the idealistic representation of the pure, submissive, and passive Victorian woman who is enshrined within her home. It is paradoxical that the poem does not continue celebrating this idealistic image. On the contrary, it shows how entrapping it can become. Despite attaining the highest level possible, that is becoming blessed, which is a title used for sainthood in Roman Catholic theology, the lady does not seem to be interested in this position at all. On the contrary, her attention is directed towards the earth, as she is described to be leaning out from the gold bar of heaven, right at the beginning of the poem. In this way, Rossetti introduces a bitter criticism against the oppressive aspects of the angel in the house ideology, which has been constructed to draw sharp distinctions between the public and the domestic spheres, so that women will not be able to cross the lines set around them. The condition of the lady up in the heavens can be compared to a bird kept in a gilded cage. No matter how shiny and comfortable the cage is, the bird lacks the freedom to fly into the depths of an unlimited sky. Queen Victoria herself, who is a role model for all Victorian women, seems to have realized the repressive dynamics of these idealistic labels prescribed upon women, because writing to her recently married daughter in 1858, she expresses her recommendations as follows. Quote, "There is great happiness in devoting oneself to another who is worthy of one's affection. Still, men are very selfish, and the woman's devotion is always one of submission, which makes our poor sex so very unenviable. This you feel hereafter I know, though it cannot be otherwise as God has willed it so." Unquote. Obviously, as a female monarch, Queen Victoria knew that she had to comply with the rules and the standards set up way before her. Therefore, instead of going against the premises of the patriarchal ideology, she had to find her way through it by acknowledging its power and dominance. In the Blessed Damozel, however, the religious ideal that Queen Victoria was celebrating, in other words, the essentialist reading of the woman as a naturally submissive being through the lenses of Christian ideology, is also turned upside down. The Damozel, despite attaining the highest position possible, because now she is one of God's choristers in heaven, and she has the privilege to enjoy the company of Virgin Mary and Jesus Christ, still she doesn't feel at home. Her eyes fixed below, she tries to have a little glimpse of her lover, but from her position it is hardly possible to see the sun. Still, she doesn't seem to lose her hope as she leans even further, and still she bowed herself and stooped out of the circling charm until her bosom must have made the bar she leaned on warm, and the lilies lay as if asleep along her bended arm. Throughout the poem, in order to underline the impossibility of restricting women to a definite label, Rossetti establishes a tension between heaven and earth, spirit and flesh, life and death, ideal and real. That's why the bosom of the Damozel continues warming the golden bar of heaven, thereby epitomizing the intermingling of the so-called fixed categories. Furthermore, as Gilbert and Goober also argue, quote, "The bars she leans on are oddly warm, her voice, her hair, her tears are weirdly real and sensual, perhaps to emphasize the impossibility of complete spirituality for any woman," end of the quote. It is the imposition of such an idealized image that not only turns women into an object, but also denies her the right of self-gratification and self-expression. Victorian patriarchal ideology, therefore, constructs stereotypical representations as a medium of discursive servitude that kills women on a figurative level. Not being able to carry the heavy burden of becoming an angelic entity in the house, the woman, paradoxically enough, must become an angel in heaven to be able to express herself as a physical entity. Yet, as the final lines of the poem also testify, as an angel woman, the Damozel is doomed to lead a life of death in heaven, for it is not certain whether she will be able to get united with her lover. Hence, the poem concludes with the bitter smile and the tears of the Damozel. "I saw her smile, but soon their path was vague in distant spheres, and then she cast her arms along the golden barriers, and laid her face between her hands and wept. I heard her tears." The sentences in parentheses are uttered by the lover on earth, who is able to hear the tears of the Damozel in heaven, because they are filled with much passion and pain. However, it is ironic that the Victorian patriarchy turns a deaf ear to the silent yet powerful raptures of the women, and they continue imprisoning them into an abstract ideal. Since Victorian patriarchal ideology is constructed upon a set of binary oppositions, as a counter-image to the angelic female figure, the system is bound to introduce the fallen women. In his poem Jenny, Rossetti projects the reflections of a male persona who spends the night with a prostitute who has fallen asleep on his tea. Directing his male gaze on the sleeping woman, the male persona feels surprised at the way in which she looks innocent and timid, for the pink blush of her youth still remains on her cheek. He continues presenting Jenny as a hybrid entity of contradictory qualities that is both shameful and graceful, yet soon enough, he feels the need to underline Jenny's main motivation, that is the money. Poor shameful Jenny, full of grace, thus with your head upon my knee, whose person or whose purse may be the lodestar of your reverie. Although Jenny can be considered as an anti-traditional poem because it pushes the boundaries and blurs the distinctions between the angelic and the fallen women, Rossetti's male persona cannot refrain from strengthening the deep-rooted stereotypes and conventions of the Victorian patriarchy. The reader continues seeing the passive sleeping women through the perspective of the male speaker, who is economically, physically, socially, and intellectually superior to Jenny. Defining himself as a man of letters, he comments on the differences between the bedroom of Jenny and his own room, which is full of books. Then he goes on to compare Jenny to a book. You know not what a book you sing, half read by lighting in a dream. In this way, he attempts to prolong his patriarchal conjecture not only on Jenny's body, but also on her mind and dreams. In the following stanzas, he compares Jenny's mind to a desecrated entity where all contagious currents meet, thereby implying eternal existence on a material level only. In other words, she can exist as a body, but not as an intellectual being, because it is reserved by the patriarchy itself. In addition to comparing Jenny to a book, the male speaker constructs various analogies that further restrict Jenny to an ideological closet. The objectification of the female body can be observed in the visual text, hence it is not surprising that the speaker directs the authorial gaze of the painter on Jenny, and he describes her like a piece of artwork. And the stilled features thus described as Jenny's long throat droops aside, the shadows where the cheeks are thin, and pure white curve from ear to chin. Jenny's throat, which is drooping aside as she is asleep at this point, paves the way for another traditional analogy, that is the comparison of the lady to a rose. But in Jenny's case, she cannot be a flourishing rose that is enjoying the spring, because according to the Victorian patriarchal standards, she is a fallen woman, and also because of the fact that she has longed to cross the border. Therefore, she is supposed to be kept in isolation. Like a rose shut in a book in which pure women may not look, for its base pages claim control to crush the flower within the soul. Here it is possible to see the extent of the ideological violence that has been systematically applied on women. Jenny has been plucked from the earth by the society, and now she is bound to be imprisoned within the symbolic walls of this book, which is crushing her soul, mind, and body. The book itself is a very good motif, which symbolizes the construction of the textual as well as the semantic oppression of women, since it is the male patriarch who decides on the contents of this ideological mechanism. Therefore, whenever the speaker feels confused and seems to have realized the hues of innocence and purity that stay deep below the surface, he feels the need to remind himself the clear-cut differences between Jenny and other women. Just as another woman sleeps, enough to throw one's thoughts in heaps of doubt and horror what to say or think, these awful squid sway the potter's power over the clay. Here, as a counter-image to Jenny, he introduces his cousin Nell, who epitomizes the ideals of purity and innocence to such an extent that to compare her to Jenny would be like enforcing an analogy between the sun and a small gold coin. Although they have been created from the same source, of the same lump, it has been said, for honor and dishonor made, two sister vessels, here is one. Still, it would be a daring attempt to bring the pure and the fallen together. Otherwise, the binary system of thought, which has been constructed upon the means of over-idealization and the devaluation of the woman, who is compared to an empty vessel, would have been turned upside down. That's why the patriarchal perspective has to sharpen these divisions rather than blunting them. Similar to the blessed demoiselle who is confined within the golden bars of heaven, Jenny shares the same destiny with her cage bird, which can only join in the song of the London sparrows behind the bars of its cage. While demoiselle has been entrapped into an ideal, Jenny's seclusion from the society have been implemented via socioeconomic causes that turn the woman body into an object. In both cases, Victorian patriarchy oppresses women on various grounds, that is, physically, psychologically, and discursively, and denies them the right to define themselves. The dire outcomes of this systematic violence can best be observed in the bitter smile and tears of the demoiselle, as stated before. Jenny, however, is not even given the opportunity to express her reactions and feelings, since all through the poem she is presented as a sleeping beauty whose dreams, ideas, feelings, and thoughts have been silenced and even controlled by the male speaker. I think I see you when you wake, and rub your eyes for me and shake my gold invising from your hair. Assuming that Jenny will be happy when she sees the gold coins, the male persona leaves the room with only one kiss. As the readers, we never come to learn about Jenny's reaction, but it shouldn't be difficult to guess that even if she feels happy for a second, it is likely to transform into a bitter realization which reminds Jenny of her captivity and enslavement within the borders of this patriarchal violence. And that was the end of my presentation. Thanks for your attention.
Okay, Seçil Hocam, thank you very much for your presentation, full of the taste of poetry.
Thank you, Hocam.
Okay, our second presenter, Priti, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, hello, by the way. Okay, let me introduce you. Okay, Priti Das is an assistant professor of English at Murshidabad University, Murshidabad, India.
Yes, it is actually a college newly upgraded to university. Okay, so please include. This is. Please include while giving the certification. Please include the name Krishnath College, because as it is upgraded to university, I thought that the newly formed name is appropriate. But then I asked my colleagues, and they asked that also use the previous name, that is Krishnath College. I will say.
Could you please write it via chat box, please?
Yes.
Okay. Her area of research interest is marginalized women writers of the 18th century English literature. She is currently doing her PhD research on romantic women poets. Okay, Priti,
Should I start?
Yeah, no. Pretty is going to. Pretty, you're so impatient today.
Oh no, I have a little baby. That's why.
Excited.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, she's going to present a paper titled "The Violent Mother of Felicia Hemans, the Wife of Asdrubal."
Asdrubal.
Yes, Pretty, stage is yours.
Yes. Thank you. I am very glad to be a part of this conference, and also I convey an fruitful conference. Thank you for that. Okay, I am starting my paper. The title of my paper is "The Violent Mother in Felicia Hemans, the Wife of Asdrubal." Felicia Hemans's poetry features a gallery of suffering mothers whose actions challenge customary definitions of motherhood. One such unconventional maternal character is the unnamed protagonist of Heman's neglected lyric, The Wife of Asdrubal. This poem offers a striking portrayal of a dejected mother who commits prolicide, the act of intentionally killing one's own offspring, which is, needless to say, outrageous and unpardonable in the judging eyes of society. Hemans's imagining of such a murderous maternal character is not only atypical but also goes against the standard romantic iconography of the mother. During the Romantic period, the paradigmatic image of the mother was that of a morally upright, angelic woman engrossed in the nurturing of her children. Motherhood was equated with a woman's innate ability to selflessly care for her children. Just as marriage was culturally perceived as a woman's social destiny, motherhood was celebrated as the biological destiny of every woman. Motherhood was not simply a reproductive function, but was also acknowledged as an affirmation of a woman's domestic identity. Marriage signified a woman's maturity and respectability, but motherhood was the confirmation that she had entered the world of womanly virtues and female fulfillment. Women were viewed, defined, and treated with regard to their status as doting mothers. From this perspective, Himans's protagonist does not deserve to be called a good mother. Rather, she is anti-maternal in the sense that she glaringly fails to perform the much lionized, much glorified role of a mother that requires her to vigilantly safeguard her progeny. In her conscious slaying of her infants, the wife of Asdrubal stands stripped of her identity as a mother and becomes guilty of the crime of infanticide. But is that actually the case? Does Asdrubal's wife really lack maternal compassion? Or is it her overpowering maternal love that drives her to kill her own children so as to liberate them from dire adverse circumstances? A close reading of the poem would help us discern the motivations behind the fatal actions of this complex mother figure. Actions which make us wonder why a caregiver turns into a slayer, into what the essayist Joseph Addison in 1713 article in a newspaper, The Guardian, described as, within quote, a monster of inhumanity. However, the wife of Hasdrubal first appeared in Himans's 1819 verse collection, Tales and Historic Scenes. Hasdrubal, the governor of Carthage, secretly surrenders the city to the Roman invaders, abandoning his people and even his family in a desperate attempt to save herself. Save himself. Left without a leader, the distraught Carthaginians set fire to the temple fortress in which they had sought protection from the Roman army. In a catastrophic scene, Asdrubal's wife, to protest against her husband's treachery, stabs their sons in his side, and while they struggle for life, throws them from the top of the burning temple and leaps down after them into the flames. An obvious literary precursor of the wife of Asdrubal is the 5th century Greek tragedy Medea, written by Euripides, who was the first of the three great tragedians of classical Athens, namely the other two, Aeschylus and Sophocles. Euripides' eponymous play is a sensational dramatization of Medea's avenging of her husband Jason's infidelity by slaying their children in a sadistic fury. Hemans invokes Medea, the archetypal murderous mother, in her interpretation of Asdrubal's wife. Just as Medea punishes her husband Jason for his marital betrayal by killing their children, Asdrubal's wife likewise orchestrates a brutal scene of homicide meant to mortify Asdrubal for his pusillanimous abdication of familial and political responsibilities. But there is a difference between the two female characters. Unlike the sorceress Medea, who flees unscathed in a dragon chariot, Asdrubal's wife does not escape, but slaughtering her children, she voluntarily embraces death, perhaps to remain united with them in the afterlife. The 60-line poem opens with Hemans' graphic account of Carthage's demolition by Roman enemies. While the besieged city turns into a burning inferno, Asdrubal's wife appears like an avenging goddess of the scene. The poem inscribes the wife in terms of seldom deployed in literary representations of mothers in the early 19th century. Asdrubal's wife is shown as being more than earthly. Her looks reflect a wild courage and stormy grandeur. Her unbound locks resemble a warrior's floating plumage, and her spirit is referred to as daring and mightier than death, untamable by fate. In other words, Asdrubal's wife has nothing traditionally motherly about her. Rather, the vocabulary that Hemans uses presents her as a formidable incarnation of retributive justice, an avenging goddess of the scene. Moreover, the wife's companion to Pythia in line 19 of crucial importance, as it ominously foreshadows her eventual act of infanticide. Pythia was a name commonly used in ancient Greece for any priestess of Apollo, the god of light, who practiced the art of ritualistic sacrifice. In saying she might be deemed a Pythia in the hour within quote, Hemans is clearly hinting at the wife's impending sacrifice of her infants. As the poem progresses, Asdrubal's sons join their mother atop the temple stronghold. Here, Hemans, as if voicing the apprehension of her readers, wonders whether the appearance of the children evokes any genuine motherly emotion in the wife, or whether the children are grimly shunned by her. Hemans seems to inquire if the presence of the innocent children effects a transformation in the protagonist, turning her from an avenging goddess into a benevolent mother. The stern disdain of fully vindictive clearly signals that Asdrubal's wife remains unperturbed, unfazed even at the sight of her naive infants. In the lengthy fourth stanza, Hemans envisions her heroine confronting Asdrubal, who stands shamelessly among the conquering Romans. In a paroxysm of the wrath over his disloyalty, the wife furiously curses Asdrubal. Even in his apparent safety, Asdrubal is nothing but a mere Roman slave in spirit who has willingly surrendered his city, who has wantonly desecrated his role as a commander, husband, and a father in order to save himself. What follows this angry tirade is the wife's climactic declaration that she will put an end to her life and that of her sons. Two key ideas are encapsulated here. First one, the wife's resolve to commit infanticide ensues from Asdrubal's ultimate act of cowardice. She will exact vengeance on her husband by making him pay in blood for his betrayal. Since she is unable to hurt him physically to vent her anger, she will kill Asdrubal for forcing him witness the horrifying spectacle of the dual deaths of his sons at the hands of their mother. This frightful scene will plague Asdrubal forever. He will always be haunted by the painful, traumatic memory of how the children were gruesomely murdered by their birth mother. And the second point, conflating infanticide with maternal compassion, however paradoxical and extremist that it may be, Asdrubal's wife reasons that infanticide is the terminus of maternal embrace. It is the ultimate act of intense motherly care. Her arms, which have been the nurturing cradle for her children, shall also be their grave. She will manage death as she has managed birth. She will not erase or abdicate her identity as a mother by slaughtering her offspring. Rather, she will reinforce it. Killing the very children she brought into this world is indeed unthinkable, but she will commit this unthinkable. She is so fiercely protective of her children that she will kill them. The last stanza of the poem describes the wife carrying out the violent act of maternal filicide after dispatching her sons with a dagger. Himanse's unnamed heroine makes two unexpected gestures. First one, she holds the dead bodies to her breast with a frantic laugh and then jumps from the roof of the temple into the fiery pyre while lifting one frenzied glance on high. Unquote. Why does Himans use the adjective frantic and frenzied to characterize the wife's laughter and glance respectively? Is the laughter an indication of the wife's insanity, derangement brought about by her husband's selfish desertion of her and her children? And why does she look up to the sky while making the suicidal leap? Is it her way of asking forgiveness from the God for a crime that is unmotherly in moral terms? Answers to these questions are indeed difficult to gather, and this is very difficult, and this very difficulty renders the poem's ending prone to several readings. Perhaps Hemans deliberately leaves these questions unanswered so that every reader could come up with her or his own individual reading of the protagonist's actions. Probably Hemans wishes us to exercise our hermeneutic or interpretive skills and draw conclusions based on them. However, the wife of Asdrubal describes the scene of Carthage in flames and his wife's own desperate acts. It is interesting to note that Carthage is described as female. I quote from the text, her walls have sunk and pyramids of fire in lurid splendor from her domes aspire. Unquote. Asdrubal betrayed not one but two women that he had sworn to love and protect. First one, the Carthage, and second one, his wife. While Carthage burns, Asdrubal's wife appears. Amid the chaos and the flames, the speaker gives this woman a glorious description. Again, I quote from the text. All regal in magnificent attire and sternly beauteous in terrific fire. Unquote. She is even likened to a priestess. True, though her husband had fled the battle, she remains loyal to her city. She carries herself with honor and dignity and glares at her husband, who is ignobly saved. While her husband surrendered in fear, this woman stands firm. Again, I quote, a daring spirit in its ooze elect, mightier than death, untamable by fate. The dark profusion of her locks unbound, waves like a warrior's floating plumage around. Asdrubal's wife refuses to follow her husband's example and surrender. The wife is the good captain here who goes down with her ship, within quote. It is difficult to defend a woman who kills her own children. It is possible that she did this to keep them from suffering either life in Roman chains or death in the flames. However, the public manner in which she did this suggests that she is trying to convey a much larger idea. Again, I quote, she seems the avenging goddess of the scene, unquote. His wife is ensuring that he loses everything that ever mattered to him, and that in putting aside his duties and loyalties, he also sacrificed his children. Additionally, children are their parents' legacy. So in killing her children, Asdrubal's wife ensures that doing so, Asdrubal's legacy will end and never be redeemed by his sons. His name will always be shamed. In killing her children, she also allows them to die as loyal citizens of Carthage and keeps them free from the taint of her husband's betrayal. Thus, the ending is one of the absolute redeeming love. It seems as if she has just a moment or two left. Instead of saving herself from painful death like Asdrubal did, his wife spends her last moments ensuring that her children do not suffer. In addition, she looks to heaven, frenzied and appealing for forgiveness as she dies, an action Asdrubal never takes. Abandonment brought out in Asdrubal's forsaking of his wife and children is one Hemans was familiar with and may have struck close to home for her. When Himans was young, her father, George Brown, a merchant by profession, immigrated to Canada to seek his fortune and never returned, causing her mother, Felicity, to raise the family as a single parent. It was Himans's first experience of being virtually abandoned, though sadly enough, not her last. Himans was also abandoned by her husband, Captain Alfred Himans, 6 years after their marriage in 1821, compelling her to support her family on her own through her writing. For many women of her time, the prospect of providing for one's family would have been overwhelming, but the resilient Himans decided to write, publish, and preserve. Nevertheless, persevere. Nevertheless, as wounded as Himans may have been over her husband's desertion of her, it can never be denied that this personal disappointment heralded some of the most prolific and commercially successful years of Himans's career. It unleashed a lot of creativity within her, and Himans became a household name in Romantic England. In fact, so quick was Himans's rise in the Romantic literary market as a best-selling poet that she became the victim of scorn from many of her jealous male contemporaries, especially Lord Byron. Byron's disdain over Himans's mainstream popularity is revealed in many of his letters to the reputed publisher John Murray, in which he, almost sounding like a misogynist, berates or degrades Himans as Mrs. He-Woman or feminine He-Man, within quotes. However, Byron's pejorative sneering, frustrated name-calling only served to emphasize Himans's greatness as a literary rival, as a strong competitor, a woman poet, making her voice heard in largely male literary world. Thank you. I end my paper here.
Okay, Kriti, thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, it's open to discussion and you can ask questions to Priti and Seçil. Yes, any question to the presenters? I think there is no question.
Okay.
For Seçil and Priti.
Okay.
Barış Hocam, do you have any question?
No, sorry.
Okay. So Mustafa Hoca is, not presenting today. If there is no question, I'm going to close the session. If it's okay.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay. Thank you very much, Seçil Hocam, for the presentation.
Thank you to all, Seçil Hocam, Zafer Hocam, and Priti.
Thank you very much. Okay, Barış Hocam, thank you very much, and all the attendants and students and colleagues. Okay, I'm closing the session.